Violence.
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 Violence. Violins. Hello. Happy Sunday. Welcome back to Phenomenology Club. It's been a minute since I've uploaded. Apologies for that. I'm a very one-track mind, and I have just been so busy with many things, including making mobile-friendly versions of all of my websites. I have 3 websites. And I'm going to be making the Phenomenology Club site mobile friendly, something that I know some of the members have wanted because a lot of these motherfuckers don't have computers. I didn't even realize. Violence. Hello, Phil Mitchell before crack. Is that Dr. Phil's name? I can't really see your icon. That's what it looks like, Dr. Phil before crack. Yeah, so I'm working on a mobile-friendly version of the Phenomenology Club website. Be on the lookout for that. I was like holding off in my head. I'm like, I'm not gonna go live until it's done, because I'm also working on some Phenomenology Club merch. I know that a few people expressed interest in some merchandise. So I was planning on like not going live again until I had it all ready, but it's just about ready. So consider this the pre-game, the pre-anthem. Be on the lookout for that. Hopefully next time I go live, that'll all be ready. I designed a t-shirt. It's cute. It's cute. Pick one up. How are y'all doing? Phil Mitchell before crack. Some other crackhead. Okay, nice, nice. Yeah, so haven't gone live in a minute. I was like, what should I talk about? I haven't been feeling like very upset about any topic recently. Which is kind of rare for me because like usually I'm like amped up about something. There's some like controversial thing going on and I'm like, "No, fuck that. This is how I feel." But maybe because I've been so absorbed with all of this web design stuff, all I've been thinking about is like the border image CSS tag and shit. I haven't been feeling like super hyped up about anything. Not hyped up, I'm always hyped up, but I haven't been feeling like anything's controversial to me. But then I was like, well, what's the last thing I got I got amped up about and wanted to fight someone about? And it was violence. So let's talk about violence. Deformed Tiger. What is up with your guys' usernames? I love it. You guys are all some degenerates. Deformed Tiger says you missed me. Thank you. I missed you too. I've been very active over here in my silence. Silence. Yeah, I'm a one-track mind. If I get too into something, I just keep doing it when I should be doing other things. So, trying to start out 2020 strong, trying to focus on what needs to be done, finishing up some music, which I've been saying for a while now. I don't care if you believe me or not. Working on that, working on some other things. I've got a noise release I'm going to be putting out. I've been DJing. I just DJ'd my first Rager as DJ Baby Eisenstein. I've DJ'd a few events before, but this was my first Rager. And I went early on in the night, so it wasn't quite raging yet, but that was very validating. If anyone was there, thanks for being there. Had a fun time. Had a great time. So let's talk about violence.
Violence.
Violence. In proper Phenomenology Club fashion, I think that what we should first do is start with a definition of the word. Whether or not we agree with it, we'll see about that. But we want to start with some definition because a lot of how we navigate philosophical concepts is by calling to mind and considering various definitions. Philosophy requires stable concepts to do it. So let's examine the stable concept of violence and whether or not it's even stable. So we always use Merriam-Webster, not Merriam-Webster, as Phil Mitchell before crack has just typed into the chat. It's not Miriam, unfortunately. It's Merriam-Webster. But we're still going to call her she because that's what I've always been doing, and that's my stable concept that I will keep stable. So, Merriam-Webster has a few definitions of
violence,
violence. Let's read them. First definition of violence: the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. That was 1A. Now, 1B. An instance of violent treatment or procedure. Okay. Definition number 2: injury by or as if by distortion. Whoa, harsh noise, brah. Distortion, infringement, or profanation. Ooh, I love that word. Profanation. Great word. I'll keep reading. Why not? There's only 4 definitions, but 3 has 3 of them. Shit, I'll just read the first one. 3A. Intense, turbulent, or furious, and often destructive action or force. Okay. And 4, the last one. Undue alteration as of wording or sense in editing a text. That's very interesting. So, an alteration that was unnecessary in editing a text. I've never heard anyone use that word in that context. Have you? A violent edit. Why would you put a semicolon there if we don't need one? That's so violent. Okay, so these definitions are all pretty straightforward. What do you guys think violence is? Let's get some chat going. The reason that I wanted to talk about violence, and the reason that I felt I had a bit of I won't say controversial, but maybe some novel ideas to throw at you in a conversation about violence is because, for one, I had a conversation not long ago when we were talking about violence in the Phenomenology Club Discord. By the way, join it for only $1 if you want to talk to me about this shit all the time. But we were having a conversation where we were talking about whether or not humans are by nature, quote unquote. We know that nature is a controversial concept in and of itself, but whether or not humans are by nature violent. What do you guys think about that? Are humans by nature violent, and why or why not? Maybe that's a good place to start our discussion. What do you think? Are humans violent? Let's get some waiting music. While you start to think about this question I have just posed to you. Are humans violent? Oh, this is not the song I want. Here we go. Are humans violent? Violence. So hot right now. Fuck my ass. But, alright, so we have some answers going. Let's look. Phil Mitchell before crack. Humans, to generalize, are pretty violent. LOL. You think that's funny, Phil Mitchell? Yes, says Deformed Tiger. A. Quinn says it depends. Tell us why it depends, A. Quinn. I was having this conversation with someone in Phenomenology Club about whether or not humans are violent, and it got me thinking that perhaps the concept of violence, this word that we have just defined together a few different ways, but perhaps the very concept of violence is inadequately described as a thing that humans necessarily possess, right? Because what does violence describe? Violence describes an action, right? and it's rooted in physicality. So to say a human is violent, I mean, does that even really make sense as a concept? What is violence? Violence can only describe, at least in the most straightforward definition of the word, the one we're going to use for now, this use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy, the first definition listed on merriam-webster.com. I feel like violence describes an action, right? Can violence describe a being, though? Like, what is a violent human? Or what would that describe, you know? It would describe a human that commits violent actions with some sort of regularity or regular frequency, right? But does that really describe a human? Because to think about a question like, are humans by nature violent? I think that you could say that in some understanding of the word, yes, but that perhaps that's not the best way to frame it, because let's think about this. To give like the most neutral example possible, morally neutral, so to speak. Let's think of a caveman, being attacked by, I don't know, what's an invasive bird? A vulture. A vulture is attacking the caveman, okay? Right? What is the caveman's quote unquote natural response? I would say that the natural response is to respond in kind with force. If an animal, this vulture, is coming at you with some sort of force that could be described as violent, some obtrusive physical action that might end up with you being harmed, I would say it is quite natural, quote unquote, to respond in kind, you know. It's coming at me, I'm gonna hit it. Does that make me violent if I'm the caveman, or have I just exerted a violent action in kind back onto this animal that is being violent towards me? I don't think that you would call the caveman, you could call the caveman violent, but I think that when we're thinking about like what is natural or whatever, I would say that violence is a natural thing, but it's not even really a thing, is it? I feel like the word violent is almost like the word good, you know? It characterizes something. It's a concept, but does violence even exist in actuality, or is it only a human descriptor, a human concept that we came up with to describe the characteristics of an action? Because, okay, let's think about me punching this vulture. If the caveman's coming for me, I mean, the vulture's coming for me. I'm the caveman. It's coming at me. I'm going to punch it. I'm going to punch this fucking vulture, right? What would it be that could be described as a violent action? I'm enacting violence towards the vulture. But what if I just punch the air and there's no vulture? Is that a violent action? I'm doing the same exact thing, but it's only described really as violent if there's someone on the receiving end of my punch. So what is this concept violence even really describing? I mean, it's very hyper-specific and it's very conceptual and abstract. I'm not sure that violence is really even understood as a concept that is necessarily rooted in reality. Of course it is in many ways. I mean, it describes natural phenomena rooted in materiality. It describes a material process. It's dependent on materiality, but does it even exist like that? Like that? Is there a thing called violence in the actual world? What do you guys think about all this that I have just spoken? I'll look at the chat. Violence is relative. That's right. Hey, Mind Ranger. Phil Mitchell. I guess a violent person describes someone who is prone to violence or likely to be violent. Mind Ranger. Nature is violent. Humans are more humble by nature than nature. Because they have doubt? Oh, what do you mean by that? What a loaded statement. Please extrapolate on that statement for us. Phil says it's maybe instinctual. Mind Ranger, look up the verb violation. We could do that. We could do that. But what do you guys think about all that I've just said? Like, I think that violence is better understood as a thing that characterizes an action more than a thing that characterizes a being, you know? I understand that you might call a person violent if they are prone to violent action, maybe committed with more regularity than someone else, but I don't even think that it's really proper to say, like, humans are or are not by nature violent. I think that the thing we call violent action is natural in the sense that, you know, if a vulture is coming towards me and trying to kill me, I think it is natural that I will instinctually, to go to what Phil Mitchell just said, I think I will instinctually, quote unquote, respond with something that's called violence, you know, but that's just kind of the state of everything, right? I don't think that that means necessarily there is violence, because like I said, I could punch the air, and if there's no one on the receiving end of my punch, I don't think that that action would be called violence. I don't think violence is really even a fucking thing. I think it's like good. It's this adjective that humans have come up with to describe something, you know, based on variable sets of conditions. But I don't think violence necessarily even really exists. What do you think about that? Deformed tiger. I think there's a spectrum of passiveness and aggression, and violence describe the rate of aggressive actions that someone commits. All right, Phil cosigns Mind Ranger saying we should look up this word violation. Let's look it up. I'm not sure why, but let's see. Violation.
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 Definition of violation: the act of violating, the state of being violated, such as infringement, transgression. Well, let's look up violating. Oh, interesting. Definition 1B says an act of irreverence or desecration. Profanation. There's that word profanation again. I love that fucking word. I'm going to start saying it. Profanation. 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 Okay. Violate, the verb. Transitive verb. Definition 1. Break, disregard. Definition 2, to do harm to the person or especially the chastity of, specifically rape. Wow, okay, Miriam, getting dark. Definition number 3, to fail to show proper respect for, profane. Profanation, profane, desecrate. Number 4, interrupt, disturb. Okay, so again, well, this is the verb version, but the noun version says the act of violating. I think this all goes with what I'm saying, you know, that these concepts describe actions. They don't really describe beings, you know. I don't think that calling a human violent really even means much, except that they might be more prone to violent behaviors. But, you know, that sounds so arbitrary, like everything I say on this fucking channel, because that's what philosophy is, a lot of stuff that sounds arbitrary. But I don't think that it is arbitrary. I think that this is really interesting when you think about it. Maybe the vulture, the human? What do you mean by that, Mind Ranger? Well, let's transition a little bit into another discussion, maybe one that's a little more specific. What kind of specific applications a conversation about violence might have on our reality, specifically our political reality. Another reason that I find violence to be a bit of a controversial topic in my own mind is because I've noticed that over the past few years, especially in our various conversations about politics, that violence has become a thing that's almost become like representative of a moral stance. Like, especially in all of these showdowns between, like, you know, groups like the Proud Boys, who are like that alt-right group of assholes, and Antifa or Antifa, I don't know how you say it. These guys are just like throwing down, broing down in the streets like a fucking hardcore fest or whatever. You know, if you raise any sort of objection to the idea that like violence is the political solution to anything, people almost treat you like you're some fucking pearl clutcher or some bullshit, you know, like, oh, you're not ready for violence. You like it's almost like to signal outwardly to your human peers that you are down to commit violence has become a moral stance in and of itself, you know? And any objection to violence is, first of all, automatically seen as like, it's like assumed that you, if you object to violence, especially as it relates to political action, it's assumed that you think violence is bad. And I mean, this is just stupid on so many levels. For one, like, my personal belief, I'll get personal for a second. My belief is that violence is a strategy, just as non-violence is a strategy. It characterizes an action, you know. If violence is the best strategy to take in any political scenario, then of course we should take it. But that could also be true for non-violence, you know. So I don't think that violence is necessarily the answer to anything, really. You have to create an argument for why violence is the solution, you know. And I think in a lot of our political discussions, it's kind of become assumed that violence is the answer to so many things. And if you object to this, then you're just a fucking pussy and you're stupid, and what's your problem, and stop sympathizing with Nazis and shit. It's like, well, I just don't think that it's always the answer. Not because violence is bad, but because what are we strategizing towards, you know? If I'm strategizing, if I'm strategizing towards a specific goal, if I want to make a painting, then I'm going to buy some paint, buy a canvas, and make the fucking painting, you know? Like, whatever my goal is, whatever best strategy I must take to achieve that goal, that's what I'm gonna fucking do. So I don't get this fucking attitude. And it's become a bit of like a controversial thing too, like speaking to people on the left, which I am a part of, obviously. There's like so much talk about like this like violent revolution or something that's like going to happen or whatever, and it's like, yeah, maybe it'll happen. If this is the best strategy, then sure, let's fucking do it. But like, why is this always the assumed mode of like how we need to get shit done, some like bloody fucking revolution? Because people say that, oh, that's the thing that's verifiable. That's the thing that in the past has been proven to work. But it's like, has it been proven to work? Has anything been proven to work in the realm of politics? No. If anything has been proven to work, then we wouldn't be in a situation where we have to strategize towards better politics, you know? Isn't violence the thing that we're always doing? Isn't war and bloody revolution the thing that we've always done? How can you say to me that this is the thing that works when clearly it doesn't? To me, it's like revolution. It's like, yeah, maybe, but in my mind, if we had some bloody revolution over the next few years, I feel like, what will that do except postpone the next one for another century? Some bullshit, you know? Anyway, violence. Let's look at the chat. Body Wash 7. What is these usernames? Body Wash 7. Oh, I love it. Violence could be rooted in survival, a set of reactions towards threats to safety resources, but there's also the unmotivated pleasure complex of violence purely for causing pain. Okay, that's a really interesting idea. Violence could be rooted in survival, you say. I'm like having a hard time with that wording because my mind is just instantly going back to what I've been saying over and over, this idea that, like, I think violence is not really anything, you know? Like, it's just kind of, it just, I think that you're right, that the idea that there is something natural about it and rooted in, like, our biological and material reality, that, you know, if something is attacking me violently, I respond with a similar kind of action. But it is, well, it is a reactionary mode. But I guess you could say, too, that it is spontaneous, right? Because why is the vulture attacking me? To go back to our illustration, the vulture attacked me spontaneously. So what is that? You know, I guess a good question could be maybe, well, what does violence achieve? You know, what is the goal of violence, especially when it comes to a conversation about survival and evolution and all this? I think that the goal of violence is oftentimes domination. Is domination natural? I feel like this is kind of the question that people are really starting to ask when they get into conversations about whether or not violence itself is natural, you know, because I think when we have these conversations, even if it's not said outright, a lot of what is being implied in the conversational subject matter is violence for no reason or towards no aim, or just like general cruelty, like you just kind of alluded to, Body Wash 7. Is that natural? Is it natural to want to inflict violence on your surroundings for no good reason, quote unquote? Mind Ranger, violence is therapeutic. What do you mean by that? Violence is cathartic? Is it? Is it? What do you guys mean by that? Like punching the drywall? Where your girlfriend sends you a fucked up text message? Violence also asserts a basic superiority, says Phil Mitchell before crack. How so? What do you mean by that? Asserts a basic superiority. I don't know. I don't know what I think. Let's think. Oh, well, do you guys think violence is a thing to be avoided? Or do you think, let's ask this question, because we're trying to define violence too, you know, like what do we think is meant by violence when people use the word? Because it seems like there's multiple tiers to how people use this word. On the one hand, it's described as this thing that could be almost understood as like neutral, which is kind of the conversation we're having here. But I think that a lot of people use the concept violence too, to in a way where it's insinuated that it's bad, kind of like selfish, you know. Selfish is a concept that has like multiple tiers of morality or ethics like built into the definition, and depending on how someone's using it, I think most people use it in a way where it's insinuated that something is being done gratuitously, you know. Like violence, I think, is similar in this way. A lot of times when people talk about violence, the insinuation is that there is a gratuitousness of force being used, something unnecessary, going above and beyond what is necessary for a thing. Is that how you guys feel that you use this word, this concept, violence? Violence. Okay, so following up from when Phil said that violence asserts a basic superiority. God, I can't read right now. Phil says, I mean, in a violent altercation, the aim of violence is to negate the power of the other person, thing, and reach whatever objective you're trying to achieve. Okay, I see that. So, like, in a sense, when you enact violence on another being or a thing, you're basically trying to overpower it in a sense. And this is why you say that it asserts a superiority. I understand what you mean now. Uh, Mind Ranger says, no, there's no superiority in it. More often, it claims basic rights or justice. Oh, what do you mean by that? That's interesting. Well, I think what Phil said just makes sense, in the sense that, yeah, if you enact violence on somebody or a thing, I think ultimately the goal of what you are doing is to overpower that thing, even if only done with the purpose of getting it to stop being violent towards you. If, some vulture is attacking you for no fucking reason, you might return in kind with violence because you want to overpower it. And in that sense, it could be understood as you asserting your superiority over it. But superiority is a loaded concept in and of itself. So, but I understand what you're saying. I think that that's accurate. Um, Mind Ranger, you were talking earlier in the chat about the idea of non-physical violence. What do you guys think about non-physical violence? Does such a thing exist? What could be described as non-physical violence? Because I have a hard time thinking of like an example, maybe like I don't really subscribe to the idea of like psychological violence, because for me it's like the concept of violence describes something physical. So something that is not physical, I have a hard time understanding it as violence. But my brain, if it had to go anywhere when thinking about something like non-physical violence, I think about things like brainwashing and like experimental psychological experiments and stuff. Something when some sort of like undue force or violation is exerted on an individual in a way where you are purposefully trying to manipulate their mental state, with some sort of psychological process. But just the very idea of psychological violence as a thing, I'm kind of like turned off by that concept personally, because I just see it. I see these kinds of ideas used in a way that I think is like really gratuitous these past few years, especially. People call all types of things violence now, like, words are violence. South Park is violence. Like, I don't even want to go there because my human peers have ruined it for me. What do you guys think about all this? Verbal abuse. I don't can I tell you something? I don't like the verbal abuse concept. I don't like it. I understand what is meant by it, and I think that it is bad, but I just don't like this. I don't like verbal abuse as a concept because I don't think it's a stable concept. And I think that something that might be more rightfully understood as verbal abuse, people just take that concept and use it to describe anything, And if I'm out on the street and I'm like, "You're ugly," to somebody, then they're like, "Stop verbally abusing me." And I'm like, dude, come on. I didn't verbally abuse you. But I'm just very turned off by the idea of words as violence, because, as I've said before, I don't care. I'll say it again. I'm really, really afraid of things like these new cases coming out of Massachusetts specifically, where a new legal precedent was set by the Michelle Carter case. I lost like 200 followers on Twitter, by the way, for defending Michelle Carter. That was crazy. I didn't know people feel so fucking strongly about this shit. Fuck you if you unfollow me. I don't give a fuck because I'm right. And Michelle, if you're listening, I got you, bitch. But like, this girl, who was convicted of manslaughter for telling her boyfriend to kill himself. I think that that is so dangerous. That is really fucked up because the thing is, suicide is not homicide, and suicide is not understood as homicide for good reason. You know, if you say that a suicide is a homicide, for one, if you try to commit suicide and, you know, the authorities stop you from doing this, they interrupt your suicidal process, then what? They're going to charge you with homicidal intentions towards yourself? I mean, it's such like treacherous legal territory, you know? So there's really good reasons that suicide is not considered homicide. So the fact that if I tell you to go kill yourself and you do it, if that can now be understood as a homicide just because of my words, the insinuation is that words kill people. And if words kill people in the eyes of the government, then that is a concept that could be so easily abused, you know? Because what if I say, fuck the police, and somebody's like, yeah, fuck the police, and goes and shoots some police? Then what? The government's gonna show up at my door and be like, your words killed police officers. You're going to jail for the rest of your life, bitch. I don't think so. I don't think so. And verbal abuse is the kind of concept that gets cited in these cases already. There's another case. This girl, she's a Korean girl. She was studying in America somewhere, I think in Boston, in Massachusetts. This is where the Michelle Carter case happened only like 2 years ago. And already now there's another case that's pretty much identical to the Michelle Carter case for this girl. Basically was telling her boyfriend to kill himself and whatever. He was telling her to kill herself too, though. If you look at their text messages, it's just like you could tell that this relationship is just so unhealthy. The things that they were saying to each other, it wasn't some one-sided thing where she's just verbally abusing him and then he lost his fucking mind. I mean, I'm not trying to, no disrespect to the dead, but like this idea that words kill people, that's very, very, very dangerous. You don't want the government to, you don't want that legal precedent to exist because, yeah, we're all fucked. If words are violence, damn. Call me Osama bin Laden, bitch. Because I have some words. Alright, sorry, looking at the chat. What? Ooh, there's some stuff going on. Body Wash 7. Would systematic oppression so diffuse in its effects count as violence? Stripping away the means for well-being, ultimately a parallel of physical violence? Well, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had here, you know, because like, you know, what is being illuminated in these conversations about how your words can have real life effects on the physicality and material well-being of others. Like, this is a very true concept. It's very demonstrable. It's obviously true, and it deserves conversation and maybe even consideration from a legal sense, you know. This is why we try to legislate around things like hate speech, even though the United States doesn't really have any real hate speech laws. And in my opinion, I do believe that we need some, but maybe not right now, because I don't think that we are smart enough, honestly. Or our the powers that be are not responsible or have our well-being in mind to legislate around such philosophically treacherous territory. But I definitely agree with the idea that, you know, ideas and words and all of this can incite to violence, incite to anything, you know, contribute to the oppression of a demographic. And that's why I do believe that we need certain like hate speech laws and stuff. But I think we should definitely draw the line long before the idea that words can literally kill people or words are literally violent, you know. Because even though I agree with the underlying idea, I think that that idea needs to be articulated pretty much perfectly if we're going to try to avoid future abuses of such a concept, because that concept is so easily abused, you know. But I definitely do believe that ideas can incite to violence. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that a lot of these conversations, like I said in the South Park episode, I think that a lot of these conversations kind of reveal a very superficial analysis. And I kind of surprised myself. I really like this analogy that I drew. I didn't even think about it beforehand, but I'll say it again because I thought it was very strong. This critique that people make of Sam Harris in particular and how he talks about Islamic ideology being the motivating force, the most powerful force in all of the troubles of the Middle Eastern world. A lot of people call that analysis super superficial because it is. It's very shallow and stupid. I think that these conversations take on the same kind of qualities, like it's a very superficial analysis to say like the reason women or whatever racial demographic is like systematically oppressed has a lot to do with representation in media and Christianity and this or that. It's like, yeah, I mean, these things are valid. There's a valid conversation to be had there, but ultimately, like, that analysis is pretty superficial. It only goes so far. Like, we have to consider the reality of any given situation and the material reality of any given situation. And so I think that to talk about concepts and ideas as being the motivating force in any action, especially a violent action, I think that these conversations should be had, but ultimately that's, if it stops there, that's a very superficial analysis. We have to go deeper, I don't think like women are just fucked because people hate women and women have bad representation in movies and whatever. I think that the issues that plague women have a lot to do with our material reality as women. The fact that I'm weaker than many men, the fact that women bear the brunt of the reproductive process, these things contribute to our reality. It's not just fucking movies. Make us all a bunch of fucking angelic idiots, Anyway, 41 minutes. Okay, cool. Let's get some concluding thoughts. Who has some concluding thoughts? What do we think? Violence. Verbal abuse, psychological violence, all of it. What do we think? Orwell was overreacting, Mind Ranger? What are you speaking about? That's interesting. I don't know. It looks like you guys are having some kind of argument. Well, I don't know. No one's saying anything. I hope that this gave you some interesting things to think about. I think that the most interesting idea here is really this idea that violence ultimately characterizes action. And I think when we use this concept, violence, to describe people, we start to get into a bit of a slippery slope philosophically. I think that we confuse ourselves. I think the more that I think about this concept, violence, as characterizing actions that people commit rather than people themselves, I feel that there's a newfound clarity in my own thoughts about violence, I think that violence can be described as a natural mode in some sense, but in the same way that, it's kind of like fast. Fast describes the speed of someone running, or slow. But does fast exist in actuality? Do you say a person is fast? Yeah, but you're describing the way that they're able to do something, it's not like fast is some like facet of your identity or being slow, I think a similar thing is true for violence. You might be a violent person in some regards, but we're describing the things you typically do. And violence as a phenomena, I don't think really speaks necessarily. I mean, it does speak to our physicality and our materiality as biological beings. I think there's a reason that, mammals, not just mammals, but animals are described as being violent. Where have you ever heard like a plant described as being violent? Not really. Maybe like a Venus flytrap, you know. So I think that there's a reason that violence characterizes certain beings' actions and not others. Excuse me. But yeah, this thing, violence, I don't think it really exists like that. Like that. It exists in another way. Um, Violence is relative to the held moral principles, Mind Ranger? What do you mean by that? Body Wash says violence characterizes reaction, but if someone reacts violently always, then maybe they could be violent. Well, I don't think it necessarily only characterizes reaction. It could also characterize spontaneous action, right? Because that's definitely true. I mean, you react to another being violent to you with violence, but why was that being violent to you in the first place, you know? What made them spontaneously become violent? I think that that's an interesting question. You know, what is the impulse to spontaneous violence? What is natural or unnatural about that? That could be an interesting question. Without principles, there's no violence, says Mind Ranger. You think so? Because I don't think that violence is necessarily a moral concept. I feel like violence is a pretty neutral concept, you know, at baseline. Like to think of the vulture and the caveman. Does this unfold as some like moral dilemma? I don't think so. I think that the question of violence, as a moral phenomenon comes much further down the road. You know, like being a serial killer versus, you know, I don't know, killing in self defense. These are two violent actions, but, you know, clearly we we consider one of these a more moral or a less moral action or set of behaviors. But yeah, I don't think that violence is a moral question in and of itself, personally. Hmm. Body Wash 7, that's the more interesting part of violence, the seemingly unmotivated. I agree. I agree. Um, and I think that we should end the conversation here, but we should talk about this maybe sometime soon because this is definitely something I've been thinking about a lot as well. You know, how do we characterize the baseline state of things in nature? You know, things that seem spontaneous or given. You know, and what are the basic conditions for being, period, you know, thinking about things like spatiality and temporality, things like this, you know, how do we characterize the basic stasis of everything? But anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks for joining me. Sorry that I haven't been uploading too much. Like I said, I'm working on these websites and some merchandise. So hopefully the next time I'm back here within the next few days, I'll have those up and ready and I'll be back on my regular schedule. So I hope you all have a great fucking night and I'll talk to you guys soon, okay?